Hey, AP Psychology. So we are going to be continuing our study of motivation. And sometimes I know as you're sitting there, it's hard to feel motivated to do what you got to do. But we're going to talk about two specific components of motivation right now that I think you will find kind of interesting and very relevant to who you are and your world. And that's hunger and, you might want to turn the volume down, sex. All right, so here we go. Let's get started. So let's first define hunger, okay? And hunger is a motivation, okay? We don't eat. We eat because we need food, and food is a need, but you are motivated to eat food because of hunger. So hunger motivation is the idea that you need to understand why you eat. And hunger is what makes you do something, and hunger creates a drive. So again, when we think of hunger, you must think about it in terms of a motivation. And we're going to get into all the reasons why we eat and what makes us hungry, and or what makes us not want to eat. Because just as hunger is a motivation, you can also think of it in terms of a way to not eat. That requires motivated behavior as well. So when we talk about hunger and motivated behavior relating to hunger, we got to look at the brain again. And there's that hypothalamus. And if you recall the 5 F's, can you name off the 5 F's real quick? I'm going to give you 5 seconds. Did you get them all? One of those is food. And the hypothalamus plays a really important role in our eating behavior. And what happens in the hypothalamus is it's responsible for sending that message for our body to release those hormones. And there's a number of different hormones at play, and more than I will be able to go over in this class, but I'm going to highlight some of those really important hunger-related hormones that the College Board likes to ask you about. So before we get to those hormones though, your hypothalamus has some specific areas in that brain part that are responsible for different types of behavior. So in your hypothalamus, there's a part that's known as the lateral hypothalamus. And it's basically like the on button for eating. So the lateral hypothalamus is what's going to tell you, give you that message, start sending out those hormones that will cause you to start eating. Okay, the lateral hypothalamus is the button, the on switch to make you eat. And so a way that you can remember the lateral hypothalamus is that maybe you feel flat. And if you feel flat, think about a soda. When it's freshly open and you open that can of soda and it's bubbly, and then it's left for a long time and it sits there and it just turns flat. And when you feel flat, you don't have energy. One of the reasons you feel flat is because you're hungry. So you feel flat or lateral when you're hungry. The lateral hypothalamus is the on button for hunger. The other part of the hypothalamus is called the ventromedial hypothalamus. The ventromedial hypothalamus. And that's the off button. And that's the button, that's the part of the hypothalamus that says, whoa, don't eat another Dorito. You've had too many. Okay, and that causes you to stop eating. Your brain's like, no, no more, stop, you've had too much. So a way to remember that, if you think about Starbucks coffee, a venti is the big one, okay? If you drink a venti, you're going to feel full. When you feel full, the venti remedial hypothalamus turns off. Okay, so the lateral hypothalamus, on, eat. ventromedial hypothalamus, off. You've had too much. So those hormones then that the hypothalamus is going to excrete. Let's focus on the four big ones. And like I said, there's others, but you got to know insulin, and insulin is a term that you've heard before. Insulin is related to your blood sugar. Leptin is relating to your metabolism. So insulin and your blood sugar, leptin and your metabolism, and then orexin. Orexin is going to be released by the lateral hypothalamus. Hunger, feed me. And when you're hungry, your hypothalamus releases orexin, and the other hormone is called ghrelin. And ghrelin, if you're hungry and your stomach feels empty, what does it do? It growls. It growls, and ghrelin is the growling stomach because you're hungry. So those are the four primary hunger-related hormones that you need to know. I've listed a couple more here, but we aren't going to cover those. Not necessary. These are the big four. So again, why are you hungry? Because you have a low level of glucose in your blood, and then you release insulin. Gotta feed me. And then it motivates you to either eat or not eat, because your body is always striving to be in homeostasis. That's the goal. So as we talk about hunger, we need to look at some of the different components of hunger and the effect it has on the body. So this first term is what's called your set point. And anybody who has ever dealt with dieting, you guys are way too young to be dealing with dieting at this point, but you might be, or I bet if you ask your parents, they can absolutely tell you what the set point is. And that's kind of this number, this magic number that your body has genetically determined that is the optimal weight for you. Okay, it's the optimal weight that your body is comfortable at. Sometimes we may not like what our body thinks our set point is, but it's just this magic number that your body magically kinds of gravitates for. And then another term is what's called the basal metabolic rate, or your BMR. And that's really an estimate. There's a calculation for your BMR, and that's how many calories or how much energy your body burns when it's at rest. If you have a really slow BMR rate, maybe you don't need to eat as many calories during the day. If your BMR is really high, then you should be eating more calories to maintain that set point. So when we talk about eating, there are absolutely some external cues that kind of trigger some of these behaviors. These are environmental factors, and I'm sure you can think of a million of them. Food is everywhere. It drives our social interactions. When you want to hang out with people, what do? You go to a restaurant because it's a social situation. Food is available everywhere. I mean, businesses, restaurants, food trucks, vending machines, right? It's available. When we have a birthday, what do we do for a birthday? We don't say, we're going to go for a hike. No, we're going to go out to eat, and we're going to have a cake. Again, you can just see how food is very much related to our behavior, these external cues. My guess is somewhere, those of you that have social media accounts, absolutely, you have some pictures of food that you've enjoyed that is on your social media pages, guaranteed, or you even follow some. Oh my gosh, during Christmas, I was following all these cheese by numbers, like how to build the perfect charcuterie board and all of these things. Ridiculous, ridiculous, ridiculous. Another component of this other factor, a specific cue that triggers our eating behavior, we're going to call it the Garcia effect, a psychologist who studied why we eat. And what Garcia found is that the Garcia effect can determine what foods make us hungry. If you go to a certain restaurant and you had something that tasted really, really good, so you enjoyed that, but also connected to that were all the people that were there with you. Or maybe you have a certain restaurant that your family goes to celebrate birthdays and special events. All of those things, when you start thinking about, oh, we're going to fill in the blank of your favorite restaurant, oh, we're going to Sabatino's, one of my family's favorite. I just automatically get pumped up and excited. It makes me hungry knowing we're going to go there. But it really isn't just about the food, because to be honest, the food isn't that spectacular. It's the experience, the external cues. Maybe there is a place that you think about their food and, oh, it just makes you scared to eat there. You had a really bad experience, something made you sick. That's the Garcia effect. Another component that we need to include in this unit on motivation is the term obesity. And obesity is a condition where you've just accumulated too much fat. You've overeaten. And in the United States, this is a huge, huge issue. Connected to all of this hunger motivation, we need to address eating disorders. And so much more can be said about this, and we'll dive into this in a little more depth when we get to our unit on abnormal psychology. But eating disorder is what it comes down to. It's a mental disorder that's defined by abnormal eating habits. And these abnormal eating habits can mean that you don't eat enough or you eat too much. And we'll get into the specifics here on the next slides. What initiates this eating disorder is very often how a person perceives and feels about their own body appearance. Again, we'll go into much more depth in the abnormal psych unit. So your body image is how you feel about your body. And then we talk about specific eating disorders. Anorexia or anorexia nervosa, that's the DSM-5 term for it, the actual psychological term for it. And this is a life-threatening disorder. And someone who suffers from anorexia believes that they will gain weight or become overweight. And so in order to prevent that, they restrict caloric intake. Okay, and starvation, it hinges on starvation, and this is definitely an eating disorder that can become life-threatening. Another very common eating disorder is what's called bulimia nervosa or bulimia, and that is recurrent binge eating. You eat a bunch, you eat a lot, and then it's followed by some type of behavior that will allow you to get rid of that food. And that might mean by vomiting, the use of laxatives, or going out and doing a ridiculous amount of exercise to burn those calories. So bulimia is a binge purge cycle. Also included in this would be compulsive overeating. And, you know, many times people think, oh, they're just overweight, but it can also be an eating disorder. They have an unhealthy and out of balance relationship with food. And someone who is a compulsive overeater eats a large amount of food in a very short period of time. They're not going to purge like a bulimic might, and they might feel very guilty. It can lead to feelings of depression and anxiety and stress. So we've got anorexia, bulimia, and compulsive overeating. Those are the eating disorders relating to hunger motivation. So now we're going to finish up this video on motivation, and we need to talk about sexual motivation. So I'm just going to be clear-cut, stick to the slides. If we were in class together, I'd turn out the lights because this can be a little bit embarrassing, but it's absolutely part of, a very key motivator in terms of how people behave. So sexual motivation is what we would call the normal human interest in sexual objects and activities. It's a desire. We don't have to have sex to survive, but it is a really intense sexual desire. Okay, people, you have to have sexual desire to have children, to keep mankind going. So it is an incredibly strong desire. So you don't need to hit stop and write all these bullet points down. But if you can get a couple of them written down, I think that would help give you perspective on some explanations in terms of what drives men's sexual behavior and what drives women's sexual behavior. And these are absolutely generalizations. They are not hardcore, to the point, this is black and white. But in general, men tend to be more sexually driven, and they are more likely to initiate a sexual relationship as opposed to women who maybe are not as interested and maybe are looking more for an emotional commitment rather than a less serious commitment. So there's definitely a lot of components here, and you can hit stop and kind of take all of these in and consider what you know and what you have experienced or witnessed in terms of relationships relating to sexual motivation. So we're going to focus on a cycle that was created and came into being in the 1960s by a pair of doctors named Masters and Johnson. And what they identified were these 5 important stages that humans go through in a sexual relationship or sexual interaction. So on the next slides, I'm going to go through and explain each of these 5 stages in detail. So here we go. The first stage is what we call the excitement phase, and this is the very initial arousal of the genitals. The brain, the hypothalamus, is going to send a message, and the hypothalamus is going to release those sexual hormones, and that's going to cause the genital area to become aroused. So Masters and Johnson refer to the first stage as excitement. The second phase is what's called the plateau stage. And you can see this diagram here, and I would suggest maybe drawing out the little diagram there next to your notes. There's going to be continued excitement, your heart rate's going to continue, your breathing rate's going to continue. Basically, these are going to be kind of excitatory actions, okay? There's continued excitement, sympathetic nervous system responses. The third phase then, excitement, plateau, now this is the orgasm phase, and this is the rapid contraction of muscles. And this is for men. There's going to be the release of semen. There's going to be this intense feeling of pleasure by male and female, both. And it's going to be followed by the resolution phase, where your body begins to return to an unaroused state. We can also call this homeostasis. And then the 5th stage is just for men, and this is what we call the refractory period. And it's kind of this reset time where men are unable to get back into this sexual response cycle. We got to talk about 2 of those hormones that are produced. Your brain sends the message, your gonads, the area in your body that produces those hormones. For men, the main driving hormone is what's called testosterone. And actually women have testosterone as well. Okay, it's not just men. There's definitely more testosterone in men than there is in women. But your bodies are going to vary. Some people are going to produce a lot of testosterone. Some women have more testosterone than others. For females, however, estrogen is that driving hormone. Men do not produce estrogen. Okay, men produce testosterone only. Women produce estrogen primarily and testosterone. However, as women get older, some of these hormone production rates are going to decline, and even for some women, absolutely go away. And this happens during menopause. So the last thing we are going to address in our discussion of sexual motivation is this gentleman here, and his name is Alfred Kinsey, and he was the pioneer. He was the sex guy. And in the 1940s, imagine being at home and being approached by a knock on the door or maybe a telephone call, and somebody said they wanted to talk to you about sex. I mean, that was outrageous. But what he found out is that it was a time in a society where people weren't allowed to have these conversations. And so when he did get people who were willing to talk about it, they divulged so much valuable information that this has become one of those landmark studies for the psychology community. And it still stands even today in terms of what he found out about human sexual behavior. There's a little bit of controversy because he was willing to talk about some of the different types of sexual desires that people might have, whether they were heterosexual or somewhere in between or even homosexual. And this was absolutely, culturally for the time, this was very controversial. And a lot of red flags, and a lot of people debunked what his results were because of this. Okay, there's the big arrow, which means we're done with this video. We'll talk a little bit more about some of these concepts in class, but there you go. Have a great day, psychology. See ya.